Welcome, guys. Welcome back to the Jesus at Pod. Pastor Joe, Chelo, and today we got a pretty cool pod idea, discussion, talk, whatever you want to say. But it's pretty cool, and I think it's cool because it's almost following suit. So far, we've found ways to link everything we've put out so far.
We found ways, like accidentally found ways.
Accidentally.
It just happens.
But to God be the glory. That's kind of confirmation that you're treading down a pretty good path. But anyway, today we're going to talk about Christian manhood and how that would affect social justice. Now, ladies, before you turn the pot off, please, a lot of you guys are raising men. A lot of you guys are dealing some way, form, or fashion with men. And this is an opportunity to get some understanding, opportunity to
gain insight.
And an opportunity to find out what biblical man kind of looks like and ways that you can help. Maybe there's two of us here. If we don't know, we're in trouble. Ways that we can help affect change, positive change in the men in your life, right? So with that being said, we're just going to jump right into it, right? So, Joe, Christian manhood, is that a such thing? Just tell me what you think about that.
Well, it's something that I think is touched on a lot. There's a lot of different resources that kind of touch on this. And for me, it's something that is a good conversation to have because the idea of Christian manhood is one that, at least in the circles that I grew up in, growing up in the church, seeing a guy in church was a rarity.
What are those?
It wasn't something that you saw a lot growing up where I grew up. It could be different, other people's experiences. It wasn't something that was common, When my dad really started coming and going to the church, he was, kind of Lone Ranger for a while. We didn't have a lot of other guys going there. And then, when we ended up going to a different church, the Lord led us to another place of worship, and there it started popping up more. For me, I think it's a subject that needs to be addressed because we have so many young men, right, kind of rudderless. They don't really know where they're going.
I think that's an awesome word. I think that's an awesome use right there. I'm going to give you props on that.
I don't know.
For you guys that don't know, the rudder is the part of the boat that helps steer it in its proper direction, right? You can have an engine and all those things, but if your rudder's out of order, you're just going to be going. You have no control over where you're going.
Yeah, so
and that is a perfect analogy for a lot of these young men.
That's right. Shots. I hear you. Well, and that's kind of why I think it's a good conversation. Biblical Christian manhood, right? Like what we're talking about today is an area where, if you're not careful, can cross over from being a blessing and a good thing to being toxic and hurtful and damaging, because a lot of times people think.
Are you diving into legalism or legalistic?
No,
behaviors?
not really. Just like this idea where you're the man, you rule, it's your house, your wife submits. And when you start going down that road,
please don't get me hit.
All of a sudden, you're in a place where you don't want to be. So when I think of biblical Christian manhood, I really ultimately, and this might sound too simple for some people, I don't know. It really, for me, is making my life try the best I can to align with Christ. The ultimate biblical man. And for some people that might be too simplistic, but I think anytime you want to aim people towards Jesus, I think you're aiming them in a right, good, solid direction.
So that kind of answers the first question, right? I asked you what were your ideas, but what does Christian manhood look like, right? What does Christian manhood look like, and what does true manhood look like? Is there a separation there?
No, yeah, go ahead.
Right? And you kind of let us down and said manhood right now looks like just pointing men at Jesus and saying, look, this way. But there's a lot of areas, right? Because for a long time, Christianity, the church, catered almost to women, right, as a whole.
Again, in some circles, yes.
And
in some circles,
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're both Puerto Rican, right? So we grew up in the Pentecostal.
I grew up in that circle.
That the Pentecostal.
And I don't want to say cater. It's just.
I mean, they were the only ones there. Let's be real.
I think it's more like
cater.
I don't want to say cater. I think
they were the ones stepping up.
They were the ones
doing the thing. So props to the women,
right,
for doing and going and being that voice in the wilderness for a lot of young people. But that just goes to show you how desperately we needed men.
But I think it kind of leans in towards where you're going with this idea. I don't know if I'm getting too ahead of ourselves here, but
don't give it away. We got half an hour to go, bro.
But I think what was happening, at least in the circles where I grew up, was that manhood, the way it was demonstrated, and biblical manhood, what the Bible would say, they seem to not meet up.
Absolutely. That was question number 2.
Right. I mean, and look, I didn't even peek down. I promise. Like, I didn't, like, they just didn't seem to meet up. It was like, what your culture, what your neighborhood, what what you saw on TV didn't meet up with the picture, not necessarily the reality, but the picture of what people were saying a man that's a Christian should be. He was being painted and portrayed as this.
That's because they ain't read the Old Testament. That's really what it is.
It could be part of that, but again, those 2 pictures were being crossed off, and Jesus was just kind of being portrayed as this, hippie. And if you're a hippie out there, I love you, but
hipsters. Nah, I'm joking.
And Jesus was being portrayed that way. And so men growing up in North Philadelphia, men growing up in Chicago, wherever,
throw some dirt on it, walk it off.
Like it was
like a punk.
It was like, no, that's not being a man.
All right, so you since you're already trying to answer it, I'm not going to hold you up. I'm going to ask you the question: how do we mesh what the world has taught us about manhood, right? That whole idea of men are aloof, men don't share their feelings, men hide their feelings, men are tough, men are action driven, and we don't really pay attention. That's not our role to be in helping with the kids. We bring home the bacon. That's it, right? The world taught us this idea. How do we mesh that with the Christian idea of really being vulnerable? Because at the core of it, it's men finding opportunities and ways to open up to their wives, children, and people around them. We talked about that with good leadership. We talked about that with finding leadership, actually growing the church. All those kind of things are countercultural to what men are, right? I think if I remember right, you did a great analogy of how where men are portrayed in media and TV and movies with The Simpsons and stuff like that. I don't know if we're allowed to say that on YouTube.
I don't know, but if you go through just like TV portrayals, you start off with like Leave It to Beaver and the family there and the father there who's in control. Things are going well. They respect him. He's loved. He's the head of the household. Yada yada yada.
A good man.
And then you fast forward all the way to The Simpsons, where you have Homer, and I love The Simpsons. I love Homer, but he's portrayed as this lazy, alcoholic, abusive father who demands respect from his family, but doesn't necessarily always do the things that should be respected, and you kind of get these clashing images.
It gets worse, man. Like I think Family, not to jump off topic, but Family Guy has a running joke of Peter being a pedophile. Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and it continues to get worse. I mean, you're right. The slope goes down, 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 and I think part of what the church has to do is they have to restore God's identity of what a man is.
Okay, so explain that to us. Tell us the picture that God is trying to paint in manhood.
If you want to, the easiest way to find that picture of Jesus, right? Of course, Jesus. But you just go to the Bible, go to the very beginning, right? Adam, and you see what God had created Adam to do and to be, and what was God's, that's the blueprint there. That when you look at Adam, that's the way God designed a man to be. That right there.
Absolutely.
And so when you look at what God did with Adam, is the first thing you notice is that there was an intimate relationship between God and Adam. So one of the first things that is just crucial to being a biblical man, or just being a man the way God created you to be, is to be able to have a deep, intimate, meaningful relationship with God, with your Creator. And in our case, as Christians, that relationship finds its foundation in Christ, right? And so what does it look like to be a man? Well, I think the first step of what it looks like is, it looks like being someone who has a deep, profound, intimate relationship with God. I think that's number one. And when you start working out from there, you see how everything else just kind of begins to...
My man knows how to make good pod, right? Because if he would have told you what, if he would have gave you the answer right there, plain and simple, you could have turned it off and didn't watch the rest. But because he just gave you the first part,
just one.
You got to keep watching. My man is getting it. But absolutely, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Our identity has to come from the person it has to start there, right? Because if not, you're not on any solid foundation.
And that works. And that works for both sides, by the way, men and women. Our identity has to begin. If we want to know who we are as a man, or if you want to know who you are as a woman, that first thing, that first step is realizing who you are in God, who you are in Christ. This is who you are. This is your definition. This is where you start.
And the reason why that's important is because now you have a foundation. Now when people say, well, you don't even know, you're not caught off guard, you're not bewildered, you're like, wait, who am I? No, I know that I have a specific identifiable identity, right? It's right there. I have somebody that I can go back to that's going to point me, that's going to tell me why. And that leads to everything else. Because if not, you're just going to fall for the person next to you telling you what you are, or social media,
or you're just gonna find yourself just lost in general, just floating around trying to figure stuff out.
Absolutely. And I think that's a big issue of where we're at. Either you're getting it from cartoon parents, or you're getting it from
social media,
absent parents, or you're getting it from social media, and you're getting it from the news, and black men are supposed to act like this. So you, instead of breaking the mold, you go
right into the mold. Right, the Latinos are supposed to be like this. Latinos, you got to be a lover, and you got to
machismo and all that stuff. Like, bro,
the taco meat popping out, and you got to be Tony Montana, right? That's every Latino male has to be Tony Montana. That's who you have to be, right?
I laugh, right, because I fell into that as a kid, like Casanova, Latin lover. I was that bull, right?
Yes, he was. At least he thought he was.
Listen. I didn't get. I can say this much: I didn't give myself those titles. Those titles were given.
Listen,
but anyway, nevertheless, that's BC. Nevertheless, absolutely. You have to be identified or find your identity in him, right?
That's where it starts.
So, knowing that, how do we move forward? How do we, now understanding that we identify with him, right? We identify ourselves in him, that we go back to him for what is the next step in that kind of work?
Well, I think it rolls out from there, right? One of the things that you see time and time again, and is portrayed in media, but is also just portrayed in reality, in real life, is how sometimes men struggle to walk in intimacy with, whether it be a spouse, whether it be their children, whether it be with their friend, their other male friends.
Now, when we say intimacy, PG, right, guys? PG.
Just closeness. Just
closeness. That means knowing someone in a very good, very strong way, right? I know this person.
A closeness with somebody.
Yeah, I don't want people to think we're talking about, because that's what they tell men. Like, you have to have a lot of conquest. That's not true.
No.
That's absolutely wrong.
No, and that's a reality. And to go back there, though, once you have that basis lined up of, this is where I am, this is my identity's in God, my identity's in Christ. Once that intimacy with God begins to form and develop and becomes firm and stable, all of a sudden now, it's easier for you to work in other areas of your life because you have a foundation to stand on. So when you are pursuing a relationship with a lady, right? All of a sudden that relationship is being framed around your reality in God. All of a sudden you're not looking to take advantage of her. You're looking in ways to serve her. If you're already married and you have children, or whatever the case might be, you're looking for ways to serve your children. You're not looking for your children to be trophy pieces. You're looking for ways to submit your life to serving them, and it doesn't look like becoming a
drill sergeant,
a drill sergeant, or a stepping stool. Where your kids, I'm serving my kids because I give them whatever they want. But all of a sudden, you have this foundation in God to be able to serve your children in ways that are meaningful to them. Serve your wife in ways that are meaningful to them. If you're not married, you find ways to serve your community and those that are around you in meaningful ways because you're no longer trying to find your identity in them.
Yeah, I would say part of that is knowing the space that you're in, right? Mm-hmm. Knowing what area in your life you are, right? We did a class where you had the warrior, the lover, and like the
different areas.
Yeah, and there were different areas of your life, and as men, we go through different stages, different periods in our lives where at one point we think we know everything. We're fighting. We're this. We're that. There's a time for that. There's a space for that where you have to have an allowance for that, and that's where it's important for men of older age to take younger men in those times under their wing, not just give up. I think we see a lot of that, a big wave of that, where men just, whatever, he'll figure it out on his own. A little knucklehead thinks he knows everything. And the truth is we were all there. We were there. We thought we knew everything. We thought we had everything figured out. But the reality was we were far from it. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And that can never be more true than what's going on with social justice issues right now, right? Unfortunately, we only are seeing parts of the picture, and the media continues to give us they're almost empowering this hate machine. You get what I'm saying? Where there are opportunities to have difficult conversations. There are opportunities. There are people marching side by side with you. There aren't racists. There aren't trying to do these bad things to you. Have these conversations, but because we think we know, because we've shunned from authority as young men, we run into issues head first, and that gets us in a lot of trouble. And that's what I want to talk about with our next question. How do we, as men, reach out or reach back to younger men? How do we, as Christian men, bring in the next generation without losing or without, you know the old adage, I'm not going to let my son beat me at basketball until he beats me at basketball.
Right. I know what
you know what I'm saying? How do we bring people on, bring them along? How do we put them under the wing? How do we invest in them in ways that still almost Lion King-esque, right? Like, I don't even want to say that I'm the king, but listen, grow. Let me show you the ways. Let me give you, like Jay-Z always talked about, leaving a blueprint, right? The album is the name of his albums and stuff like that. How do we do that for those coming up behind us in an effective, godly way? Because a lot of times what we see is we're sending a lot of our foolishness down. Like if I shared with you the things that the men in my life shared, they're not good things. You know, I had to throw a lot of it away.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Shouts out to the men that gave me solid foundational pieces in my life. You know what I'm saying? But for the most part, a lot of it was just garbage.
No, I hear you. And well, I mean, to answer the question, I think there's several things that we can do. And it's going to be weird, but it's things that we kind of talked about in some ways before already. There's going to have to be a commitment to those young men, right? A lot of young men have been left out to dry. either their dad has left altogether or their dad is there, but is kind of, emotionally not there. He's just kind of gone. And so when you have that there, one of the things that the barriers that you're going to have to get through is that hurt that they're already going through. Oh, here's another person that's just going to come in and kind of,
it's a consistency thing
and flow away. And then the other part of that for you is you can't go in there with the superhero mentality. I'm going to fix, everything's going to be good. I'm going to, because I'm here, I have the Bible, I have the gospel, I'm a good man, I'm going to fix it.
That's that's an awesome lesson right there in itself. We are not Superman. Like, stop
right.
it.
So that's the other part. So not only a consistency, right, being there, intentionally being there, like not just being there to be there, like, yeah, I'm here, like, but being there on purpose, again, Superman syndrome, like, don't just assume because you're you and you have the Bible and some verses that's it, that's going to be the end all be all, fix it. I think another thing that's really important if you're going to invest in the younger generation is listening. Like really listening to what they have to say.
Because they're younger than us. Exactly. They don't know what they're talking about.
We're so quick to dismiss what their fears are, what their concerns are, what their doubts are, what their worries are, because you haven't lived enough. That might be true in some instances, but just the act of listening, that you're able to hear what they have to say and then process that out for them and be like, look, I hear you. Like, I can understand you. I feel you. And just listening is going to go a long way.
Yeah.
And then I think the next part of it that becomes really crucial, if you want to invest in that in the younger generation, besides being consistent, besides throwing out that Superman syndrome, and besides listening, is really, really, really investing your time with them.
You just cursed at a lot of people.
Yeah, right I know. Investing your time in
Can
them.
I just drop off some money?
No, I mean you can. I'll take it.
Hey.
No, but investing your time. And so I think that's one of the things that's most important because, time is very precious. I understand that. But if you're serious about seeing a younger generation of men grow and be whole, it's gonna require some sacrifice. And your time is part of that sacrifice.
Awesome. All right. It's kind of in the same realm. How can we be protector if we're called to show such soft sides? Like, I get this question a lot, and I get this assumption a lot, right? You're a Christian, so you soft.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, cupcake soft.
That goes back to what we were talking about, right? Like this picture of Jesus as being this sweetie
I'm
pie.
Like, y'all didn't hear the rest of the David and Goliath story,
right? That's my go-to all the time. One of my favorite parts about this story of David and Goliath is everybody hit him with the slingshot and it's over. No, read the rest. Like he goes to Goliath and he cuts off his head and he holds it up.
We're not glorifying bad stuff, moms.
It's not. That's not where
we're not. We're just saying there's a line there. There is a line where, if at all possible, like if you have to get with somebody, after trying your best to turn the other cheek, after doing these things, that's between you, God, and the person that
right.
you might have to lay hands on.
It's a situation where a lot of wisdom is going to be required.
Wisdom and Bizzle, he's a Christian rapper.
Mm-hmm.
He's got an awesome song. Oh man, I want to find the name of this song just because it captures this very good, and it talks about sometimes your W's look like L's, sometimes your wins look like a loss, right? And he talks about in the song the situation that we all go through, right? We're in our car, and for some reason, we get bigger muscles in our car, and we start acting a lot more tougher than we really are. It's amazing. Like, I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in people like 2 feet tall are giants in their car. Things they wouldn't say to people in real life. But anyway, the song goes, somebody says something to him in the car, and he's got his wife and kids, and he's like, man, I gotta show off. Like, you ain't gonna disrespect me in front of my wife and kids. I gotta let them know I'm still the man. And then his Christian kicks in. Is like, nah, man, just let it go. You got your kids in here. Be smart. It's not that big of a deal. Just let them go. Bye. So it plays out in two portions, right? One portion, he acts gangster, and he pulls over, and the guy pulls over, and they're still yelling. As he walking to the guy, he notices his hand somewhere. Long story short, the guy starts shooting, and Bizzle is yelling out, "Babe, I think I'm hit. Babe, I think I'm hit. Help me check." But she's not responding because it wasn't him that got hit; it was her.
Mm-hmm.
And the moral of the story was that him and him trying to look big ended up hurting the people around him more than him.
And that's the reality.
And that is the reality. So often is the reality that sometimes it is just better. And this goes back to the first piece. Who do you identify with?
Mm-hmm.
Where is your identity coming from? Because if you're still being identified by what the world says man is, you're going to fall for this bait every time.
Every time. And I mean, and that falls not just in that area. It falls in so many areas in your walk, whether it be controlling your anger, which is essentially what we're talking about there, whether it be, the stigma, especially, amongst Latinos, of conquering women sexually, right? I'm going to get with this one now. I got 10, 15, 20. Yeah, I bagged all these. And I'll never forget, it was Pastor Eric Mason of Epiphany, who had said this, at least the first time I heard it, was, any man can sleep with a bunch of different women, right? Any man can do that.
Eric
But
Mason.
it takes a real man to please one woman for their whole lives together. And that's such a reality, because we think that is this big deal. Oh, look at what I could do. I got with this girl. I do it, but that's not manhood. That's and I know this is Matt Chandler. That's just boys who can shave. Right? That's just boys who can shave talk. Like, oh, look what I can do. Look at me. Look, I can do this. I can, and that's childish behavior. It really is, and that kind of behavior gets glorified in circles that and it's not necessary. There's no reason for that kind of behavior. There's no reason for other men glorifying that. You are tearing down women. You're tearing down your sisters. You're tearing down your mothers. You're tearing down your aunts, because you think that having multiple conquests of women is something that demonstrates how much of a man you are, and that's just not the reality.
That's completely a misnomer. Like
that's a major L.
Listen, you telling me dealing with the same woman 11 years, right? 10 years.
Figure it out.
We're about to be on 11.
Figure it out.
Anyway, you tell me who's gangster, the dude who walks away or the dude who comes back every day to take that abuse? I'm just saying.
Now you heard that.
I'm just all jokes. But it takes a real man to day in and day out go back into that fray, Matt Chandler, and work it out and be there for those people and be something that they can depend on, right? To fix all the problems that you had when you were like a kid. And it's not we're fixing it, but it's Christ who's fixing the errors that we saw growing up. I remember one of the biggest lessons that I had to learn growing up was I saw men and I saw all the things I didn't want to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
My issue was I never saw what I was supposed to be. Right? I saw a bunch of things. Well, I don't want to treat women like that. I know I don't want to do this. But I never saw, all right, this is what it's supposed to look like until, again, I got around the brother Rob. I got around the brother Chelo. I got around a young Pastor Joey. And I started to see pictures and glimpses. Pictures and glimpses of what men should be doing and how they should be reacting and how they should be challenging and developing younger men. You know what I'm saying? Those things were impactful in my life at a young age, and those are some of the things that I still tried to pass on and carry. And then also very quickly, I know we're talking about men, but shouts out and props to the women of our lives, right? Our
Absolutely,
moms.
yeah.
Like my mom had to be mom and dad, and she was one of the toughest people I've ever met in my life. And she instilled in me one of the greatest work habits I've I've ever seen. Her toughness, her grit. There was no one she didn't help, and there was no one that she didn't take care of.
Right.
Helped me when I started actually becoming a Christian and living out the things. Something that she said to me years before was one of the mantras that I ran with when I started coming to church was, if you can't be directly in service, be in service to those who are serving. And I took that and tried to be helpful to anybody who was trying to help the cause of the kingdom.
Right.
And it was an awesome thing in my life. So shouts out to my mom. Thank you. Much love. But all right. The next question, Joe. How can we live out our faith as men and still live up to the expectations of life? Now, this goes to work-life balance, success, and all those things, right? How do we play that balance of being the success that we've see that's what it's supposed to be, right? How do we do that and still be faithful to the church, still be faithful with our time, still be faithful and committed to things around us when we're still striving to put our families in places and positions to succeed?
Yeah, I think this is an answer that not a lot of people are going to like.
Go for it.
But I think it's just a reality. Is that if you want to pursue all that God has for you, whether you're raising a family as a man, whether you're single and trying to live out all that God has for you, wherever you are, whatever your station is as a man, it doesn't really matter. Again, whether you're married, single, whether you're a father, single father, part of a mixed family, whatever the case is, one of the things that you're going to have to prepare yourself for as much as you can is that if you want to be successful in whatever station you're in, it's going to require you to be willing to be wrung out. Just wrung out. And that's just going to be a reality. As far as expectations go, listen, the only expectations that we're striving to hit are the ones that Christ has for us.
Well done.
That's it.
Well done, my good and faithful servant.
That's it. That's all we're striving for. I'm not striving to be, it's funny, this conversation usually comes up when you're talking about moms. So often moms struggle with this identity of having to be the super mom, where lunches are packed, dinner is cooked, I go to work, kids are picked up from school, homework is done, clothes are ironed, everything. And they struggle with this, like, how I'm like, and the same thing I tell them is the same thing I tell any man who's trying to meet all these expectations is that, listen, you're not trying to please anyone. Your goal is to serve Christ, and in serving Christ, you'll end up serving them. You'll end up, it reminds me of Mary and Martha, right? Where Martha's doing all the serving, running around all crazy, and Mary's sitting down at Jesus' feet. And Jesus says, hey,
she picked the better portion.
Right. She picked where she needs to be. And so I think that also applies to men. Look, I get you want to strive. I get you got goals. I get you on your grind. You're making money, whatever the situation is. I get all of that. But at the end of the day, you have to be prepared to be wrung out if you're being really honest about God being going back to what we started with, being your foundation, being that first pillar in your walk. If that's really the reality, then He's going to wring you out. He's going to wring you out, and you just got to be ready for that. But here's the thing, and I think this is a reality for us, is when you've worked and had a good, productive day of work, the end of the day is so much sweeter than when you haven't. When you know that you've been wrung out and you were able to serve your community, you were able to serve your wife, your children, wherever it is that you are. When you reach the end of the day and your head hits the pillow and you're able to have that little time with God and say, Lord, thank you for this day, thank you, whatever it might be, it hits so much sweeter when you were wrung out for God's glory and not wrung out because you got caught up doing things that you wanted to do. Absolutely.
When I wrote this out, right, the answer that I came up with was I came up with two answers, and I jotted them down real quick, and it was, first, know the expectation. Whose expectation?
Right.
Yours and Christ, right? I don't even know if I need to say anything more after that. Know the expectation. We do have expectations on our own life, right? Mm-hmm. But what are God's expectations, right? For I know the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to hold you back. You know what I mean? Things like that. He's always going to want better for us. So if we're striving for to meet his expectations, it almost supersedes our expectations.
Absolutely.
Now, again, do not get me wrong. It's not that you shouldn't have expectations, because that leads to idle, lazy men, and we don't need those. We need men who are willing to step into those areas that God has called us to step into. But what I am saying is understanding sometimes we might overreach because of man, and then fall into those Superman areas, fall into those I have to compete with another person area. No, be satisfied in what Christ has given you and what he's doing in you. Now, that doesn't mean that you can go ahead and be lazy. I got what I need. I don't need to do anything else. Absolutely not. Now it's how can I pour into other people, right? All the overflow is for somebody. It's for those around you. So I would just say that. The second part, how I would answer this is there are opportunities to just be wrung out, right? You have to be willing to work, because there's two sides of man, right? There's those entitled men who mom did so much for them that they just grew into women doing everything for them. And then there's those other men who just don't want to do anything, right? We got to stop that altogether, right? We have to step into those areas where we are working, right? One of the first charges he gave Adam was do this, do these. And they were small tasks, but they were tasks.
It was designed to work.
You know what I'm saying? They were created. We were given these abilities to do things, and that's our job. And that's not to down anyone who's not working or anything like that. Even if you're not working, there's still things that you can be doing for the Lord to push his kingdom further, right? So do not mistake what we say. All right. All this being said right now is all good, but it's not good if we don't put it into action, right? So my last question is, Joe, we just gave a bunch of tips on how to develop better Christian men. Now, how do those better Christian men serve in pushing the social justice agenda further?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things we need to understand is when we get into the social justice conversation, is that as believers, we're not fighting just for because that's the flavor of the month. You know, like we're not saying we're on the social justice bandwagon right now because that's what's hot and that's what we want to talk about. As believers, we want to talk about social justice because we serve a God who's just. And his justice is inseparable from his love. You can't take the two away from each other.
Check the tape. My man's been talking about community for over 3 years right now.
Yeah. You can't separate the two. God's justice and God's love are bound. How can you make that statement? Go to the cross. You'll see it there. God's justice, his just act over sin, but his love for sinners clash and they come together, and they those two things collide at the cross. And you know, I've used this picture before, and I believe it's Brian Loretz who I got it from, is this picture of a vertical and a horizontal, that the cross is pointing towards a vertical relationship with God and a horizontal relationship with others. And at the cross, right at that place, those two things come smashing together. And so for us as believers, if we want to be men who step into the arena of social justice, I think the first and most important thing is to realize, why are we stepping in? It's not just because, like I said, it's the flavor of the month. That's what we're talking about. We're stepping into that arena because you have to be convicted that Christ, that the Bible, that the gospel has something to say about it, and that the gospel has an answer for it. It has a way where we can start taking that bend away from injustice, sin, shame, and start bending that thing back towards who God is. And if you're going to be someone who wants to stand into that arena, step into that space, and you're going to do it as a man, it's going to require you then to be a man who is looking to Christ as the example setter of what you should be doing in times of injustice. And if you step into this arena, again, thinking, I'm Superman, I'm going to fix it because I got this cool quote I found that nobody ever heard before. First of all, Trust me, plenty of people heard it before. I'm going to step into this arena. I'm going to fix it because, look at me. I'm a minority and I speak eloquently. That's not going to fix it either. If you're going to step into the arena of social justice, you have to step into it with the right mindset. And that mindset is here. I'm here because I serve a God who's just and who's loving. And so if you're going to be a biblical man who steps into that arena, I think that is where you find your foothold is I'm pursuing justice because in justice I can see God's love. And I think that's where that ball starts rolling. And from there, then you just have to hear the voice of God and pursue wherever it is he's calling you to pursue.
I got to stop letting them go first. How do you follow that, right? Anyway, so when I ask the question or I think about the question, to me it's very simple, right? We cannot keep sending broken man to try to fix broken situations. We got to make the man whole again. And the reality is that, and I'm not just talking about black men, I'm talking about minority men in general.
Not just men, man. Just
men.
Yeah.
Let's make it all inclusive, right? Just men in general. We're not whole. We're lacking. And some more than others, but as a whole, there's something missing, right? And Jesus plays a big role. So when I say true man, I'm talking about a God-believing, God-fearing man who is after God's heart to go into these places and step into these realms where they can have those awkward, uncomfortable conversations with someone of the opposite color, with someone and actually listen and actually hear, because now they're no longer bitter and are hurt because they've been healed and sealed and covered in the blood, and now they can actually see, all right, I can listen to you because I know my identity, I know my purpose, I understand, and I want justice for those coming behind me and those who already passed, right? And they can listen and not be scared of what they're going to hear, or not be fearful, or not be enraged by what they're going to hear to the point that they shut off. Now, they can still be enraged by what they hear because some people might still say some foolish things, but true man, how Christian manhood helps push social justice forward is very simply healing the man. And a healed man does wonders, right? Because a hurt man wants to see other people hurt. You can see by the writing, right? I was watching the Emmanuel Ocho thing, right? Mm-hmm. And he said the third level of grief is anger. And that's what you're seeing in the riots. You're seeing us just be angrily just venting what's going on. And that's what we're talking about. Like, you might not be able to find your healing in the protests, but you might be able to find the healing at the cross, in laboring with your brother and sister, in having conversations and love with your brother and sister who might have a different viewpoint. And the reality is that whole man helps better the situation by stepping in with the full armor of the Lord, with the full bracing and backing. And that's not saying that that's going to immediately fix everything, but that is going to help move that needle forward. And that's what we're talking about. I know you guys are, I know Joe said something about the flavor of the month and things like that. We at this pod have never been about doing something because it's cool or trying to get clickbait. What we stand for and what we try to do is finding practical ways to apply Jesus in every situation. And this is the situation that we find ourselves in. This is a situation that our pastor has been talking directly or indirectly for the last 3 years about developing better community-based structures so that no one is left out, no one is left in need, no one is left with feeling alienated or separated. And I'm not trying to toot his horn or anything like that. I am actually speaking from just being around and actually seeing it. So please don't take us for saying, oh, you're just jumping on a fad. Absolutely not. We believe exactly what we're saying, and we've been preaching or teaching that for the last 14 years at Bridge of Hope.
Long time.
Right? So the reality is whole man helps hurt men hurt men. So
Are you trying to rap?
No, listen, I'll leave that for the better. But Joe, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, to close, I think I'll just say that this wasn't an exhaustive conversation.
Absolutely, we didn't even start to.
There's like
really
1,000
tackle
things.
There's what is it? Pastor Eric Mason's.
Yeah, there's all kinds of resources and materials that you can go to. Again, like you mentioned, Pastor Eric Mason's Manhood Restored. I would suggest that to be a great starting point for anybody.
Act Like Men, McDonald.
That's another good resource. But if I was to say anything just to close, is just that I want to encourage men to honestly examine their hearts, right, and see where it is that they need to start surrendering to God. I know for
that's a whole nother level.
Yeah. That's why
we didn't even touch that.
I'm not touching.
We need to do a part two.
But just really start examining their hearts and saying, "Look, I need to start letting go of some of that stuff," because I think for a lot of us, there's some baggage that weighs us down, and either because we're afraid, or because we're too prideful, or because whatever the reason might be, we refuse to release some of that baggage. And some of that baggage is deep stuff, but we refuse to release some of that, and we get so weighed down that we can't move forward. So I want to encourage my brothers, let go of some of that stuff, man. Move forward to all that God has for you, to all that He's planning for you.
What they say, reach one, teach one?
Something like that. So that's what I would say. Just, be ready to surrender, move forward. And that's what I'll leave that where that is, right there.
Amen, guys. So that's Pastor Joe. I'm Chelo. Again, we're just chipping the surface on manhood, biblical manhood, and how that affects social justice. If you like it, please leave a comment below. Let us know. Hit that like button so we can come back to it. There's so much more. We didn't even touch surrender. We didn't touch growth
all kinds of stuff.
And digging deeper into how we can help each other. So please, guys, again, if we've messed up or we're in any error, again, we're trying to keep them short, or shorter than normal. But again, much love, much peace. Pray for those people. Pray for somebody different. I tell my kids every night, don't forget to pray and pray for somebody different, guys. Love you guys. Peace.
Peace out.